I'm going to begin our study through church history, which again I've organized into 20 lectures that will hopefully be somewhere about an hour each. But I'm going to begin this time just with a very brief scriptural introduction, even though I want to take pains to emphasize with you that church history is not Scripture. We do not base our faith on church history. We do not base our faith on what great men, even the great men of the church, have said in times past. So we really want to make a distinction in our mind between Scripture and church history. Scripture is Scripture, church history is church history. But yet we can definitely learn from what God has done among men. And we can learn from what men have done towards God. Now, I got to say, the lessons are very often bitter and dark. When you really understand church history, there's oftentimes more discouraging lessons than there are encouraging lessons. Sometimes the lessons are bright and glorious, but often dark and dark and gloomy. Let's take a look here at Psalm 78, verses 1 through 8. To me, this psalm is just one of a few different passages in the Bible that give us sort of the permission to really have an interest in history and to study it. He says, "Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and His strength and His wonderful work that He has done. For He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God." And I just want you to notice two very quick things from this text. First of all, there's the encouragement to know and to learn history. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come. And so this idea of relating what God has done in the past to understanding it for ourselves, of course, but also relating it to our children is a very, very important concept. But I want you to notice the closing verses here, and that they may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation. Again, I think the psalmist is sort of cluing us into something that we'll find as a persistent theme through church history, that you see a lot of stubborn and rebellious people throughout church history. And this will be a familiar theme that we come back to again and again. So we open church history with our eyes wide open here. We embark on this study here. We're taking a look at it, fully understanding that God has done some incredibly wonderful things in the history of the church, but man has also done some dark and terrible things. So with that sort of out of the way, let's sort of consider where Christianity stands in the setting of world history. And you'll understand what I mean by that as we go on. Christianity is a faith that concerns itself with big ideas. We would say that the Christian story is significant. You could even say it's significant cosmically. We claim that this work of God is relevant not only for people of one faith, but for the entire earth. Indeed, we claim it's relevant for the entire universe. Even though our focus is going to be on the history of Christianity, and if I could make it even more specific, the history of Western Christianity, we believe that the big story has relevance for the entire world because it's all going to be remade as part of God's eternal plan. Now, if you want to, you can divide the time before the emergence of Christianity into 10 general periods. Now, whenever you see a list like this, take it with a grain of salt. Let's face it. You can make all different sorts of divisions and distinctions. Some people might have more things on a list. Some people might have fewer. But the general idea, I believe, remains the same. So here are 10 periods of history that I would describe to you before Christianity. First, the period of innocence and the fall. Second, the period of Noah and the world that perished. Third, the period of the patriarchs, of course, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and including Joseph. Fourth, Israel and Egypt. Fifth, the Exodus. Sixth, the time of the judges. Seventh, the united monarchy, covering the reigns of Saul, David, and Solomon. Eight, the divided monarchy. 9, exile, and then 10, the 400 silent years, or what is sometimes referred to as the intertestamental period. Now, after this, you could say begins the historical period of Christianity, beginning, of course, with the emergence of Jesus Christ on the scene. Right? I mean, Jesus is the beginning of church history, even though we're going to talk very little about that, because that's really more adequately covered in a Bible study class where you study the documents of the New Testament. And so we're really going to consider in this class very little of what we might consider biblical church history, even though I'm going to freely admit to you that's the most important thing to study and to know. If you could choose between really knowing church history in all the 20 lectures that I'm going to give to you in the next several days, if you could choose between knowing that and choose between knowing the book of Acts forward and backwards, pick the book of Acts. The New Testament is more important for you to understand than the history of Christianity. Now, we're not saying that there's no value in understanding the history of Christianity. There definitely is. But again, we just want to make this distinction between Scripture and history that's very important for us to keep in mind. Now, at the time that Christianity came on the scene, there were 4 what we might call high civilizations representing higher culture. These 4 civilizations were the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, India, and China. In China, the Han Dynasty ruled China from about 200 BC to about 200 AD. And under the Han Dynasty, Confucianism was the state-supported religion, but there was also Taoism. Now, Buddhism was introduced into China at the end of the Han Dynasty, but it didn't gain a large following until later. In India, Hinduism was strong, and Buddhism came 5 centuries before Christianity, but it also flourished in India. The Persian Empire was in constant competition with the Roman Empire. The official religion of the Persian Empire was Zoroastrianism. But the Roman Empire is, of course, most interesting and relevant to us. First of all, because one might argue that it was the most dynamic and influential empire upon the earth at that time. I mean, we don't want to say that China and India and Persia were unimportant in those times. Of course, they had great significance. Of course, they had high culture, but they had nowhere near the subsequent influence that the Roman Empire had. But of course, it's also relevant to us because it's from within the Roman Empire that Christianity came forth. Now, if you want to speak religiously, the Roman Empire at that time was marked by several religious and philosophical ideas that were generally joined together into a pluralistic system. This great empire, which encompassed so much of the civilized world, had a whole variety of religious expressions in it. So listen to me here. First, there were the official religions of Rome. These were the ancient Roman cults, to which were added the worship of the emperor. Then there were the philosophies of Greek origin. Okay, so first you had the official religions. Those would be the traditional pagan religions of Rome. Secondly, you had the philosophies of Greek origin, which you would include under them Platonism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, the Cynics, Neoplatonism, all these different philosophies of Greek origin. But then thirdly, in addition to the normal pagan religions and the Greek philosophies, you had the